Episode 23, A Morning Passenger. It was another quiet night in the city as Jerry drove his cab around in search for his next passenger. Like many of the nights he had recently experienced, the quiet and dim streets were disappointing as always. But it hasn't always been this way for Jerry. It was only till recently that he decided to drive at night as his twin grandkids were no longer in daycare, which would, back then, end in the evening, and would be timely for his daughter and son-in-law to pick them up right after leaving the office. Now that his grandkids are in elementary school, they would end school earlier, and as Jerry's daughter and son-in-law would still be at work, Jerry volunteered to fetch the twins and take care of them till the evening before he drives his cab. Although he made less money now, the night shift suited his emotional state better as he didn't want to be home during the nighttime. At home alone, quite a distance away from his daughter's place, Jerry would keep thinking about his wife, whom he lost through illness 2 years ago. So, ironically, driving through the empty streets at night helped him to feel less empty in a way. However, one night shift he experienced was unlike any other. After Jerry had driven around for a couple of hours without customers, Jerry suddenly saw a lady wearing what seemed like a white nightgown, standing at the side of the street, waving down Jerry's cab. Jerry slowed down and stopped right by the lady's side. As she opened the back door and entered, Jerry then asked the lady, "Where to, miss?" The lady then replied, "The cemetery, right off town, please," which slightly startled Jerry, seeing that hardly anyone went to the cemetery at night. But as Jerry knew what the lady meant by the cemetery right off town, he just said, "Okay, miss, we'll be there in about 30 minutes. As Jerry was driving, the atmosphere in his cab was really quiet. At the start of the journey, neither Jerry nor the lady said anything. As the journey wore on, Jerry began to hear the lady crying softly. He looked at his rearview mirror and saw that the lady had tears running down her face while looking out the window. Jerry assumed that the lady was crying after a recent loss of a loved one, which explained the reason for wanting to go to the cemetery that night. Initially, Jerry didn't say anything as he didn't feel right to ask about her personal troubles. However, as the cab ride was turning slightly awkward, Jerry felt that he needed to break the awkwardness. Jerry began to speak and said, "I too lost someone recently. My wife left a few months ago after being sick for so long, which is why I prefer driving at night. Nights at home feels so lonely without her." After a brief silence, Jerry heard the lady stop sobbing and said softly, "I'm sorry. I hope you're okay." As it felt less awkward now, Jerry then asked, "I haven't been to this cemetery that we're heading to for so long. How is it there? Did they finally set up some lights along the pathway?" The lady then replied, "Yes, they have. It's nice to sit there and remember all the beautiful moments you had with the person you're visiting." After that, the two of them sat quietly in the cab as Jerry began thinking about his wife. Jerry could see from his rearview mirror that the lady was still staring out the window, but now no longer crying, and even began to smile a little. Upon seeing this, Jerry was glad that the lady was starting to feel better. At that point in time, Jerry had already driven his car for 20 minutes out of the city center. After a long, narrow road with only trees and bushes to its side, a path soon opened, and a plain grass field was now in view. Slightly further in front were graves aligned in straight rows that stretched for hundreds of meters. Once arrived, the lady said, "Thank you." "You're very welcome," said Jerry. After a slight pause, the lady then said, "I know this sounds weird, but can you accompany me for a while to the grave I'm visiting? I don't feel like being alone today, and would really appreciate some companion. Although hesitant, Jerry couldn't bring himself to reject the lady, seeing how she seemed to need some companion at that time. Jerry then said, "Okay, sure, but I can't be too long as I have to continue my job. Is that okay?" The lady then said, "Thank you so much. I won't take long." The two of them exited the cab, walked through the grass field, and then through a small cement pathway that led to the grave. Jerry saw a small, newly built grave, which seemed like it belonged to a child. Possibly even a newborn baby. Both of them squatted in front of the grave, and that was when Jerry saw the name Sarah Mitchell written on the tombstone. Jerry then began to wonder if it was the lady's baby that she wanted to visit all this while, but never mentioned it. But what puzzled Jerry after that was when he looked closer at the tombstone. He noticed that the date showed that the baby had passed away at birth, the day before. He realized that it wasn't possible that the lady was the mom, as the baby died during labor, and the mom would still be at the hospital recovering. So Jerry thought that it was probably the lady's niece that she was mourning over. As Jerry was still thinking about how the lady was related to the baby, the lady turned to look at Jerry and said, "Anyway, sir, thank you for accompanying me all the way out here. I really appreciate it." Jerry snapped out his thoughts and replied, "No problem. I felt that you needed someone around, and I couldn't say no and leave you all alone when you're feeling down. Anyway, if you don't mind me asking, may I know who we are visiting here?" as Jerry finally asked. While the lady was still looking at Jerry, she smiled at Jerry's question and said, "It's my baby." Still confused as how it could possibly be her baby while she was all well, Jerry didn't know what else to say and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry it happened. Are you really okay? It must still hurt from giving birth." The lady then replied with a sad smile on her face, "It's okay. I don't feel pain anymore. I'm just sad that she didn't even get the chance of life. I wish I could have given my baby more." As the lady turned to look at her baby's grave, she continued and said, "I'm so sorry, dear. Mommy wanted to give you the best in life. Mommy even bought you new toys and clothes at home. Mommy is so sorry that Mommy wasn't strong enough." The lady slowly began sobbing again while Jerry stayed quiet and continued looking right at the baby's tombstone. Jerry then gazed his eyes to the right, and what he saw next shocked him. He saw the tombstone next to it that read, "Mother of Sarah Mitchell, Deborah Mitchell." Jerry saw right below it, which stated the date of death, exactly the same as the baby. Jerry then turned to look at the lady as she sat there squatted, still facing the tombstone. The only difference is that now Jerry could no longer see the side of her face, as her long hair had covered it. And the sobbing that Jerry heard earlier had turned silent in an instant. Fear suddenly sank in as Jerry finally realized what was going on. Almost fully certain now that the lady squatting beside him was the spirit of Deborah Mitchell, Jerry fell on his back, away from her. Still in fear, as Jerry was crawling backwards away from the lady, she said in a soft tone, "Thank you. Thank you for listening." Jerry was still on the ground when suddenly he heard someone call out from his back and said, "Hey, may I know who you are, sir?" skeptically asked the man who walked over and wary of Jerry's intent of being there. While still trembling, Jerry turned his head to look at the man. Jerry pointed towards where the lady was squatting and said, "This lady needed..." but stopped in his sentence as he turned back to realize that the lady was no longer there. Scared and confused, Jerry then said, "There was a lady here just now. She said she needed some companion to visit a grave. Sir, that's my baby's grave you're sitting in front of. And next to it is my wife's. She passed away together with our newborn child during labor yesterday," said the man, who still looked almost soulless while in a full state of mourn. After Jerry shared with the man about what had happened earlier, the man became less wary. He sat beside Jerry, right in front of his baby and wife's grave, as they chatted for a couple of hours, as the man poured his heart out. After that, once they decided that it was time to leave, Jerry said one final thing. "Do call me when you need someone to talk to, yeah? I know how it is to feel hurt and lonely at the same time, feeling as though there's no one to turn to. Whenever you feel that way, call me." It was almost dawn now, and even though Jerry didn't earn a single cent from that night's shift, he was glad that his lonely self was able to keep others company in their loneliest times. And even though Jerry just then realized that he didn't even get paid for his trip to the cemetery, it was a priceless trip nonetheless. It reminded Jerry to be more appreciative for the loved ones that he still had, as there are others in a lonelier situation than him. The following day, Jerry asked his daughter and his son-in-law if he could live with them, and they gladly agreed. In fact, they told Jerry that they wanted him to move in earlier, but seeing how Jerry couldn't leave his home filled with memories of him and his wife, they patiently waited. Jerry felt much less lonelier since that day, seeing how he still had his daughter, his son-in-law, and the twins that loved him ever so dearly.